Well, hello again. So this is the second part in going over some little clusters of metrics that I've written up here and there. Most recently, they appeared in this article that I had yesterday. I went over business metrics, if you remember that, kind of like measurements and metrics, and I think I had 5 ones to start with. If you don't know what some of them are, and today I want to go over what we'll call some technical metrics. Now, as with the business metrics, right? Like this is just a little sampling, a starter. You'll probably want to refine these and come up with other ones and things like that. These aren't like a complete set to metrics virtue, but they're good ones to start with, and probably they're ones that you will always track. So these four are based on, as mentioned here, essentially a lot of the work done in the DevOps reports over time, and a little bit of commentary from SRE world, and just paying attention to what metrics are. I think a couple of years ago there was a lot of discussion about the SRE golden metrics, site reliability engineering, that is. So thankfully, if there's one thing in the DevOps world, or whatever we call it nowadays, that we have spent a lot of time focusing on, it's monitoring. I used to work in the monitoring world back when I was a software developer at BMC Software, and monitoring is nice. It's very definitive. You get a number, you get metrics, and dashboards are cool and have black backgrounds with kind of neon coloring in the front. Awesome stuff. So let's just go over these four baseline metrics, and they are. So first of all, again, the framing here is that we're doing digital transformation, which in the things I care about means that as an organization, you're interested in getting much better at how you think about how, as else I would say, you do software, how you specify it, how you build it, how you run it, and more importantly, how you incorporate it into the way your business functions, right? Your software, the apps that you have are going to be, if not the primary, mission critical to how your business functions and operates, maybe even what your business is. So we're concerned about software, getting a weekly cycle in place where we can experiment with new features, new ways of doing software, and make sure that they're working and always be innovating. So here's some metrics that I think are a good starter, and probably, as all the sources for this kind of emphasize, probably will be ones that you're always monitoring. So the first is deployment frequency. How often are you deploying your software to production? Now, I would generally think about this not as necessarily patching or small changes, but how often you're deploying an experiment, a customer-facing, a person-facing feature. And this is important because one of the primary, what would you call it, ways that you're getting better at software, you're innovating with it, is you're very frequently trying out something new, a new feature. If we allow people to fill out this form this way, does it work better than filling out the form some other way, right? Like someone like Booking.com here in Amsterdam is legendary for somehow automating thousands of tests a day so they can always refine the way that you're doing your travel booking. So it's really important to keep an eye on how frequently you can deploy, right? Now, generally, I recommend a good level is to be able to deploy weekly, right? To get your software out the door weekly. Now, it may be the case that every couple weeks is better for you. It might be the case that multiple times a day is better for you. Whatever. You should find that over time. But I think a week is pretty good to focus on. Now, it's important to keep track of this, just sort of like you do a vital stat on your body, right? If you are falling back, you haven't released something. You do a week, and now it's taking 2 weeks, or consistently now it's taking 3 weeks, right? That's probably a cause for alarm for you. And by you, I mean sort of the managers, the people kind of above it all, if you will, kind of looking at things, helping make sure that your system of the organization is operating well. It's probably good to go figure out why the deployment frequency has lengthened. It could be the case, especially at the beginning, and even probably in the first year, that maybe that is the natural pace that you should be operating at. And my recommendation of a week was too aggressive or whatever, right? So you first want to question, like, is this a readjustment that we need to have? Is this normal? Or are there actual problems that are occurring? But, getting to the level where you can measure that is good. Now, with this metric and all the other ones, if you can't get these metrics, that's a good indication of something that needs to be fixed at first. It's probably a type of tech debt that you have when you're initially trying to do your app modernization and fix things up. So the next one is a subset of deployment frequency, right? And this is where, like, if you want to get like definitionally precise with lean terminology and all sorts of things, you can just like go to town, just like various religious sects debating with each other about the finer points of the holy word and things like that. But I think what's important to monitor here is that, and it's kind of like a inverse of this, but after the developers are done, after your code is ready to ship, right? Like how long does it take to deploy to production, right? So what is the time it takes to move a fully ready to ship package to production, right? And here I call it lead time for changes. You can call it whatever you want, deployment time or things like that. But this is important because it tells you two things, right? One, how long does it take your developers to like do stuff, right? What's your expectation for creating the product in the factory? And then two, what this is allowing you to monitor is how fast you are just purely from an operational standpoint to deploy things. And again, what you want to figure out here is what your natural rate is, and start monitoring if it lengthens, right? If it's getting too long. Now, this also will give you a sense of when it comes to security, like deploying patches, how quickly you'll be able to roll patches out, right? Like, it's a little different. Figuring out a patch, like there's some verification that you hopefully will want to do, but it should be relatively fast. You kind of get the patch, and you need to very quickly roll it out. So it also will give you a sense of how fast you can change production if you have something ready, right? And again, like I said, if that starts to fall behind, it's a good thing to check in and see what's going on there. And us in VMware Tanzu land, that's a metric that we spend a lot of our time focusing on. If you become a customer of ours, right? So when we build on top of we kind of expand out the basics of what Kubernetes does and add in all the ancillary things of getting stuff running on it and all the other stuff that you need, and then going up to the Tanzu application service, or Pivotal Cloud Foundry as it used to be called. Most of that, well, yeah, I would say the majority. It might be 51%, it might be 80%, I don't know. But the majority of that is focused on this metric, right? Figuring out speeding up time to market. And then the other 49 or however percent is focused on your developer doneness with their code, right? But it's often the bottleneck that most people have is this getting stuff to production that takes a long time. Now, you could also take lead time to changes to start to monitor. You might also think about it as lead time to get an environment set up, right? One of the other very common barriers people have initially is your software developers, your product managers, your product teams are all ready to go. And then they have to file a ticket to get resources to set up the labs, the developer environments, right? So that kind of thing to monitor, if you think about how long does it take infrastructure, operations, sysadmins, you might call them the DevOps team, whatever, to respond to a request and give people the resources that they need. Because the super ideal form here is that it's completely self-service and you have continuous delivery for your developers. Now, I think as we saw was it the CNCF survey somewhere most recently, there really actually are not that fully automated deploys to production that we've seen over the years. People prefer to have some human verification and intervention and checking, which I think that's likely a good idea. It can take just like 5 minutes, but it's good to have some eyes on it. Now, the next one, and again, this is a operational one, is what's your time to restore service? Would that be TRRS? I think that's a type of 3-ring microphone jack. I'd have to check on that. I think that's TRRS. That, whatever. But it's very confusing, microphone jacks. It's one of those. This is related to tech stuff. Oftentimes, and I think USB-C cables are like this, and those microphone jacks, you have more than one option because there's different sets of functionality. And my position generally for these types of things is, I mean, especially if it's a wire, right? If it's a software development and runtime environment based on Kubernetes with multiple layers of features and functionalities that different people, different segments with different pools of cache and thoughts about if they should do it or could do it on their own will have. You're segmenting out your market. That's one thing. But if I've just got a wire that I'm going to plug into, some computer stuff, it's just like have the wire do everything. I don't want to have to figure out which end is a TRRS versus a TRS versus a TRRS. I don't want to deal with pirate wires. Anyhow, so time to restore service. What's going to be happening when you're deploying so frequently? One of the things that I think the Agile people in the late 90s and the 2000s kind of started to slowly change the mindset of, and then the DevOps people and definitely the SRE people now have really driven this home, is that, hey, big reveal here. Software has bugs in it and crashes in production all the time, right? Errors happen. That's just the way things go. And so it's a fool's errand to try to prevent all errors, right? Or it's a very expensive, very long thing to do for all of your software. So instead, what you want to figure out is when errors occur in production, or again, whatever layer you're looking at, how quickly can we get back to a good state? Now, oftentimes that means rolling back to a previous version. It might be shutting down feature flags. A feature flag is basically, it allows you to turn on and off features in production. It could also be, how quickly can we scale up to meet more demand? But figure out how you can judge your time to restore service. Now, I guess it's kind of a backward-looking thing, right? That you're kind of keeping track of how often it is that you can do that. And if you want to be super crazy, you can do all the chaos engineering stuff and on purpose bring down your system and start to, kind of figure out how quickly it takes you to restore service. I shouldn't say bring down your system, introduce chaos into the system and how quickly you can recover from it. What do you do with time to restore service? So monitoring time to restore service is important because ideally, you would like to always see that shrinking, right? I'm sure there's, I don't know, a certain amount of minutes that probably it's realistic to be the minimum amount of time. But it's another one of these things that you need to figure out what the baseline is and monitor for the exceptions, right? The aberrations. And use it as a reason to go check out why it takes so long to restore that service. Now, if your time to restore service is in days, maybe even hours, that's probably another indication of something initially, some sort of operational debt, some sort of operational tech debt that you need to go figure out and solve for, right? A lot of these things are in that category of the two quips I like to use, the quip, not a quip, but the idiom of having a safety net, right? But the quick quip that Andrew Schaefer used in some executive thing we had once, that if you want to, it's cool to learn, learning is great, but if you want to learn to surf, you need to make sure you know how to swim first, right? And getting the baseline and knowing what these metrics are, that's your learning to swim part as you're figuring out surfing. There's another interesting aspect on all of these that I've kept having in my mind to mention, which is what if they're improving, right? What if they're constantly getting better? So one, that's cool that you're improving. But two, there's another thing that when things are getting better, when you see a lot of improvement, it's an opportunity to ask, am I underrating myself about something? For example, if your deployment frequency actually extends out to 2 or 3 weeks and it's consistently that, and you go investigate things and it's cool, that's what your natural rate is, right? But if you figured out that your natural rate is like a week, and then like every third or fourth time you manage to, do deployment like on a daily basis, I mean, I don't know, you're probably not, there's probably the chance that you're not meeting your full potential. Or to put it in a very negative way, you're being lazy, right? Like you're inflating your estimates and inflating things, you're padding it out. So whenever you're doing really good consistently, you're overperforming on any of these metrics. It's a good time to go in and see if people are kind of fudging out what reality is, so that they have way too much slack to fill it in, which is not like, you always need slack in your system. But it's good to go challenge yourself and see if you can push yourself more. As I went over in the urgency video, right? It's always run in the yellow, not the green, not the red. So then finally, the change failure rate. What this one is basically, again, it's another one of these metrics built around the idea of getting comfortable with the fact that your software is going to have errors and going to have bugs. And this one is basically just tracking when you have failures to your deployments, right? You can, sometimes it could be an error budget is a kind of a related SRE thing, but it's good, again, as always, for monitoring that things are normal, right? Like you said, a normal layer of what our change failure rate is. But it also allows you to, I think, monitor when things are going bad, obviously. But it allows everyone, especially the product managers who are prioritizing what to work on, to sort of know when what's the way of putting it? When they don't have to make an A, to use another one of my little concepts. And that is, it's okay to have some bugs, right? This is a weird way of thinking that we used to have in software, which was that we'll ship bugs because those bugs exist and there's just higher priority things to work on. So we're going to ship with errors, right? This is not really a way that you want to sell software to someone, that you're totally cool with shipping errors, but it's a reality, right? There's going to be defects or whatever that you have to ship with. And if you have this acceptable error rate, what's normal, then it allows you to kind of think like, well, we are within the error budget, right? We are within the change failure rate of what we're doing. And so it's okay. We can spend that time to prioritize on something that might be more important instead of just getting obsessed with getting an A+ being perfect. And in the SRE world, they have there's a, I guess it's worth commenting on that a little bit, but there's a bigger concept called, not a bigger, another one called error budgets, which is, it's kind of similar, right? It's how many errors you can have, your budget. But it also, as with all these metrics, it drives another interesting opportunity, which is when it comes to setting these ongoing, maybe every quarter, whatever makes sense for you, it gives you the chance to be explicit and negotiate with yourself and your operations people and all the separate groups that you'll have in a large organization to kind of negotiate what's normal, what's acceptable, right? And again, if you're thinking you're going to do 100% perfect, you're going to get an A+ every time, you're just going to suffer and things aren't going to go well. So you need to figure out how much failure is acceptable, how many errors are acceptable. And it gives you a tool kind of that you've all agreed on. I wouldn't say it's neutral, but it gives you a tool that if you exceed those, everyone knows that you need to figure out what's wrong and fix them before you move on, right? So it's very clear and it's not individually subjective. It's not up to an individual, a manager, to say like, whoa, we can't ship features now. We've got to focus on fixing our shoddy factory. Like the thing, we're not doing things well and we keep getting too many errors. Or the operations people can't say that, if it's on their own, based on their own stuff. Everyone agrees that we have to stay in these parameters of normal. And if we don't do that, we've all agreed up front that we're going to address it and fix it, which I'm sure does not resolve people's fear of the other and not fear and suspicion and thinking it's someone else's fault instead of just like all throwing in together and realizing that we're all in the same boat. I think enterprises are more like flotillas where we're not really in the same boat. We're more in an armada of ships. And so, when someone else's ship goes down, it can be totally cool because we've got enough other ships and we can always just build another ship. Or it could be totally terrible if the wrong ships go down or if you had some friends over there or whatever. But there's an enterprise is characterized by many, many boats, not just one boat that we're all in. Anyhow, that act of negotiating things and that whole new framing for how you collaborate with different groups is it's an interesting, I don't know if it's side effect, but side effect in that it is to the side of an ancillary related thing to metrics like these and things like an error budget. If you're interested in reading that full article there, you can go to the URL that's up here if you want to type that out, or just go to tanzutalk.com and find the show notes for today's episode, and you can get a link to it. a lot of these are covered in a couple of my books that you can get for free: Monolithic Transformation and the Business Bottleneck. Let's see. You go up there right now. You can click on it to go get a copy of these books. I'll put a link to probably, I don't know, one of them. And you can download that for free. Also, if you're thinking about performance metrics like these, like tech metrics, you're probably thinking about running Kubernetes. Now, there's a lot involved in running Kubernetes. I work for a vendor that sells Kubernetes, so you can believe me or not. But what I find with organizations I talk with is they have it in their head that they can get Kubernetes up and running on their own. One, there's two things they discover. One, it's a lot of work. And they start to own that platform, and they have to update it and do everything on them themselves, which starts to be very costly and distracting. And two, they find that there's a tremendous amount of things that they need to do in addition to the great core that Kubernetes is to kind of fit into that flotilla of an enterprise, and a whole bunch of functionality to add in. Whether it's super boring stuff like governance and security, super boring to me. More interesting things like service meshes and the whole tool chain that people use. There's always all sorts of things that you discover that you need with a little core thing like Kubernetes. So we have all sorts of things in VMware Tanzu land that you can use just from a very basic, I think we even call it basic, standard, advanced, and a forthcoming one that includes the Tanzu application server. But you should check those out. You can just go to tanzu.vmware.com to see them. Right up there. Now, also, if you're just learning to use Kubernetes and the concepts, if you're a VI admin who knows virtualization or just someone who's curious, you should also check out kube.academy. And you can go there and get all sorts of free training from basic to intermediate to advanced. So, as always, you can go to tanzu.talk to find the show notes for this and things referenced. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.